remember the circumstances in which we had to do that deal. Under the terms of the Ben-Burt Act, or as it was called, the so-called Surrender Act, we couldn't leave unless we agreed to the EU's terms. And there was no doubt that we faced a particular problem in Ireland, where we were told that we faced a choice. If the UK wanted to come out of the customs union and the EU internal market, and if we wanted to keep an open border across the island of Ireland, which we emphatically did for the sake of peace on the island and the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, then we would have to make sure that we somehow checked on goods that might go from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and then on into Ireland. And that is what the protocol does. And purely to help the EU, we agreed to check on those goods entering Northern Ireland, as I say, that might go on to Ireland. And I thought those checks would not be onerous, since there isn't actually that much stuff that falls into that category. Most of the goods stay in Northern Ireland. And it's all my fault. I'm fully accept responsibility. And the protocol itself, and this is why I signed it, contains lots of reassuring phrases about how Northern Ireland remains in the customs territory of the UK and will benefit from participation in the United Kingdom's independent trade policy. The protocol notes the importance of maintaining the integral place of Northern Ireland in the United Kingdom's internal market. But beneath the paint and plaster, there was the cold steel reality of EU control. And the Commission was in charge, and not the UK. And contrary to my hopes, they did not apply it sensibly. And we had the mad ban on sausages and potted plants and tractors and heaven knows what, and people unable to send parcels to their grandchildren. We had very serious diversion of trade, as British retailers couldn't move goods like shortbread from one country, from one part of the country to the other, even if they didn't actually have stores in Ireland itself. And of course, these everyday frustrations were particularly acute for unionist communities in Northern Ireland, who felt they were being cut off from the rest of the UK, which I bitterly regretted and I felt was absurd, because the large majority of Northern Ireland trade is with the rest of the UK. And the problem I had was that there was nothing legally that the UK government could do, because we'd given that power away. And that is why we had the bill, to fix it and to sort it out. And that's why I believe we had that majority of 80 seats, because I think the people of this country sensed that we needed to fix it. And that bill does fix it. It's still in Parliament. It does fix all these problems. It removes any border checks down the Irish Sea. It would allow the UK to determine VAT rules in Northern Ireland, state aid, subsidies, and so on. And above all, it would allow Northern Irish firms to make goods and of any kind, put them on the market in Northern Ireland if they conform to UK standards and not EU standards. So a dual standard regime was envisaged. And I don't believe for one moment that it would have necessitated checks north-south, certainly not by the UK. We would not have done anything of the kind. It would have kept and respected the balance of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, the EU did not like that bill. They did not like it because it took away their control, and above all, because it frustrated their key objective by keeping Northern Ireland in the single market for goods. And that made it much more difficult for the UK to diverge and to do things differently, because of the strains that would place on the Union. And I can tell you that in all my conversations with our friends in the EU over the years, it was that idea of divergence, that whole sort of Singapore-on-Thames concept, whatever you may think of it, it was that idea of divergence that they feared, the UK actually taking advantage of Brexit freedoms so as to be more competitive. And so, in my view, they use the Northern Ireland problem as a way of keeping us more or less where they wanted. So that their system, the European Court of Justice, and all the rest of it was still glomped on and, in some important respects, still in charge of part of the UK. And I remember Angela Merkel actually coming up to me at I think it was a G20 summit, and saying, if you continue with this bill, it will be a Shakespearean tragedy. Well, she turned out to be right there. Though I leave it to you to work out which tragedy it was. And so I was thrilled when, in June, that bill sailed through the House of Commons unamended. I was pleased when the present Prime Minister and his predecessor said that they would continue with it. And so when I look at the deal that we have now, I, of course, have mixed feelings. I'm conscious of where the political momentum is and people's deep desire just to get on. And this has got to be about the people of Northern Ireland, the 1.9 million people, their businesses and their lives. And given that we have got rid of the bill, I can see why so many people are attracted to accepting a compromise. And I agree passionately with Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, for whom I have the highest regard, that the people of Northern Ireland need their assembly and they need their government. And it's not for me to advise Sir Geoffrey, but I hope that he can find a way of reconciling himself and his party to this outcome, which is the fact that we have, and getting back into Stormont. But, and I am conscious I'm not going to be thanked for saying this, but I think it's my job to do so. We must be clear about what is really going on here. This is not about the UK taking back control. And although there are easements, this is really a version of the solution that was being offered last year to Liz Truss when she was Foreign Secretary. This is the EU graciously unbending to allow us to do what we want in our own country, not by our laws, but by theirs. They're not scrapping hundreds of pages of EU regulations. They're passing EU law. They're passing new regulations to allow British goods to pass from one part of this country to another, still under EU law, but with what they hope will be lighter bureaucracy. 21 data points on the forms instead of 80, to be completed by trusted traders who can show the EU that they have certain assets and goods for sale in Northern Ireland, and to be prominently labelled not for EU, among many other provisions and restrictions. Look, we've got to hope that it works and genuinely reduces frictions. I'm particularly concerned that goods going for processing and manufacturing in Northern Ireland from Great Britain, goods that are part of a supply chain, seem to be going through the red lane for firms above a certain size, which seems pretty crazy and not supportive of the UK internal market. And what this will certainly not do is allow goods made in Northern Ireland to be made according to UK standards, unless they're also EU standards for sale in Northern Ireland. Or at least it is very, very unclear the extent to which that would be allowed. It's very unclear for foodstuffs, for motor manufacturing, and all the rest of it. The EU single market remains paramount. And in that sense, this deal helps to accomplish the key objective that I spoke of. And so it acts as a drag anchor on divergence.